Then our next section about sustainability fisheries, we invited Mr. NOMURA-san. 这边其实特别介绍一下，刚刚提到 UNEP 有一些针对海洋垃圾的部分。那我们这边其实非常荣幸请到野村先生，他之前在日本水产厅从事了渔业管理大概有30多年。那时候包括在 ICAT、在 IOTC、在 OECD 的渔业工作小组曾经担任过主席，所以他非常了解渔业，也非常了解台湾的渔业。昨天跟他聊到一些在1990年代大西洋渔业组织的事情的时候，他还半开玩笑说那个时候台湾是个 bad guy 这样子。但是他们觉得经过一些努力之后，让台湾加入了 ICAT 的组织之后，有蛮大的进步。那NOMURA-san在2000年2000年到2009年的时候，在 FAO 的粮农组织担任助理副秘书长。那我们特别这样的提示，因为在那段期间的时候，他其实非常善良的帮助台湾用 NGO 的身份参与了 FAO 的 Coffee 的相关会议。所以我想在座有蛮多渔业署的同仁，其实都曾经有机会到 FAO 联合国罗马粮农的总部里面去开会。那 even 到那之后呢，其实NOMURA 退休之后呢，在日本待了一段时间，然后现在在印尼渔业部担任顾问，也协助他们进行一些渔业管理的部分。所以我们今天非常荣幸请到NOMURA来跟我们分享，究竟怎么样从一个世界的角度、世界的视野去看永续渔业这件事情。Let's welcome Mr. NOMURA-san.
This is my 5th visit to Taiwan. I'm very pleased to be here to see many friends. When Professor Julia said my remark about Taiwan, I hope she interprets completely. I said that Taiwan used to be a bad player, but not anymore. That is very important. Professor Julia told me my current job, I live in Jakarta. I work as a fishery policy advisor to the Indonesian government of Ministry of Fisheries. But I don't think I was invited because of that position. I used to work in the Japanese government, mainly involved in the international negotiation fisheries, almost 30 years. Then I moved to Rome, to FAO Fishery Department, and I stayed there for 10 years. Probably inviter wanted me to speak about that kind of global fishery issue, not necessarily my experience as a current work as a fishery policy advisor to the Indonesian government. Anyway, what I'm going to present is to start with the state and trend of world fishery resources and catch. I think those information is not new to you. You are expert on that. Most of the time I will spend on current and future challenges because I think I'd like you to know at least the items of current problems. I probably will not be able to give you any scenario for solution because so many factors, but I think it's very important for you to know the agenda of the world fisheries, which is emerging and challenging your future fisheries. And I will touch on outlook and areas of framework of future cooperation. Okay? This is a well-known graph, a very well-known picture. This is both capture fishery and aquaculture production trend. You can see the green one, it's a capture fishery, including inland fishery, which it doesn't make much percentage, but you can see the source of increase recent came almost entirely from aquaculture. Aquaculture production, 90% of them coming from South Asia. And of course, China is the biggest player for aquaculture. Total aquaculture and capture fishery is 1.67 million ton. Capture fishery 93.4 million ton. Aquaculture 73. Still, aquaculture is less than capture fishery, but if you look at the human consumption parts, aquaculture already surpassed capture fishery production as of 2014, I think. So it's a general picture. You can imagine the future increase will have to come from aquaculture because the capture fishery has been leveled off almost more than a decade. This is again well-known picture. Which country is a major player for marine capture fishery? Always China. Not many people know number 2 comes from Indonesia. Somehow Peru is not within number 5 because it's Peru's catch, as you know. 90% of the catch is anchovita, whose catch fluctuates depending on the oceanic condition, not necessarily fishing activity. So some year Peru comes number 1, some year very bad. 2014 happened to be the year Peru's anchovita catch is not so high. That's why number 6. But again, majority of capture fishery comes from Asian countries. What about aquaculture? A similar pattern, but more concentration on Asian countries. Here we divided into animal and plants. Here you can see Indonesian's share of plants, that is seaweed, is very high. So does Philippines. Norway's aquaculture, as you can imagine, represented by salmon. So does Chile. This is again very famous graph describing general trend of status of world marine fish stocks. It's a very tricky graph because you can use this graph to fit your agenda. First of all, what is fully fished? Fully fished, it's been fished to the point of maximum sustainable yield. So it's nothing wrong. It's a textbook biological category. Law of the Sea Convention aims at free exploitation. Or exploitation may not be the right word, but the fully fished, no waste. Now, if you are environmentalist, not necessarily friendly to fishery, you can use this figure saying, world fishery is either fully fished or overfished. That gives very bad image, which is also true. That is to say, almost more than 80% of world fishery is fully fished or overfished. That gives very bad image. Whereas you can always say world fishery is fully fished or underfished. 60% of those fishery is fully fished or underfished. That is to say, in other words, world fisheries, more than 60% is fished within biological safe limits, which is also good. So FAO used to categorize, up until several years ago, 3 categories: overfished, fully fished, and underfished. But many members of FAO did not like that kind of category classification. Therefore, they requested FAO Secretariat to change the classification into unsustainable way and sustainable way. So now FAO is usually said, let's say these parts is okay, these parts no good. Nonetheless, it gives a very much pessimistic scenario, that is to say, overfish share of world fishery, that is, you can say depleted, the share continues to increase. That's pretty bad. I will just say a few words about current problem, which don't spend much time. What's the problem? We don't have much information, necessary information for stock assessment and fishery management. We have declining resources caused by overexploitation and overcapacity. Overcapacity is too many vessels. We have lack of effective management. Insufficient monitoring, control, and surveillance, which may lead to IUU, illegal, unreported, and unregulated. Now, many countries do not participate in international framework for management, regional fishery management organization, or even do not implement international instruments. It's just a general picture depicting a current problem. This is one example of why we see the problem of information lack. This graph tells what percentage of reported catch by species level. That's the sample of the report to be made to FAO from South Asia countries as a group. The black part represents NEI, means not elsewhere included. So just say fish, no species classification. And that amounted almost to more than 10,000 tons. That's a big amount. And those information, even though reported, are not so useful for the purpose of stock management, stock assessment, and therefore management purpose. Of course, we understand why many fisheries cannot be reported by species, unlike the case of the United States or Norway, which are more or less represented by single species fishery, whereas Southeast Asia fishery is a mixed fishery. So it's very hard to make report by species, but I think but since particularly those Southeast Asian countries represent high percentage of the world fishery, I think they have an obligation to make more precise report, because their report really depends on the picture of the status of world fishery. It's just one example why we need more information. I dare to classify the emerging issue and the future challenges by the following category. Effective fishery management, everybody agree. Intervention from environmental consideration means you have to consider environmental concern when you consider for sustainable fishery in the future. You have to deal with fight against IUU illegal fishery. IUU fishery. It's everybody now know this word. That means it has become prevalent issue. We also have to consider social and economic consideration. Of course, economic consideration remains a main factor, because fishermen are not fishing from philanthropic viewpoint, but for economic activity. But social issue in fishery has become problem. Since we have to rely on increased aquaculture production in the future, supply of fishery, we have to consider more on sustainable aquaculture development. So I will talk about from those 5 angles. Management. First of all, we have to consider more implementation of the responsible flag states authority, whether you are talking about domestic fishery or international fishery. I think we have to introduce limited access anyway, both domestic and international fishery. Also, country will have to make records of fishery registration. Depending on the system, you can call fishing registration or fishing record. Some country fishing vessel registration and fishing vessel record is almost the same, while other countries different. But anyway, what is at stake is flag state should take responsibility to record all fishing vessels. In order for it to do so, you have to have probably fishing license system as well. For both international fishery, maybe less, but more so for coastal fishery, we have to introduce right-based fishery management along with the fishermen's organization. And encompassing all those factors, we have to make some guideline for flag states' performance responsibility, and FAO did it 2 years ago. We have a lot of existing international instruments, Law of the Sea Convention, 1995 UN Fish Stock Agreement, Struggling Fish Stock and High Minority Fish Stock. I think you know both of them, but just in case. Struggling Fish Stock refers to Article 63, Paragraph 2 of Law of the Sea Convention, which straddle between high sea and economic zone. We have similar stock we call shared stock, that is a straddle between several countries' economic zone. That's a different category, and we don't call it straddling stock, but shared stock. Highly migratory fish stock is basically tuna and shark, which migrate wide ocean. Code of conduct for responsible fishery, which is voluntary, but that represents all aspects of fishery activity, and that has been the core of FAO Fishery Department. At the beginning of 2000, there are 4 issues which was very topical those days, and which still are. That's why FAO made a special effort for a particular instrument called International Plan of Action for fishing capacity, because fishing capacity has to be managed for any fishery. We have too many vessels, just overcapacity. Shark has been already kind of a magnificent animals for fish, mainly from the environmental society. And because sharks does not bid good commercial price, fishermen tend to disregard shark. So very few in the RFMO and very few nations has a management system on sharks. They just cannot afford to. Therefore, shark was left alone. And because of the shark's biological vulnerability, some shark stocks has become troublesome. So if you had to deal with a specific issue of shark. Long line bycatch of seabirds. No fisherman would like to catch seabirds, but they catch anyway. And particular seabird which attract attention from environmental society was albatross. And long line fishery catch a lot of seabirds as an incidental catch. That has become a problem. And of course, IUU fishery. Okay. Also, the effective fishery management in the future has to go to more participation in RFMO. Almost all over the ocean now being covered by RFMO, new and old, and also more compliance with their agreement measure. Let's go to environmental consideration, which has a lot of menu. Now, CITES, Washington Convention. I think everybody knows that. Washington Convention is a convention to regulate international trade for endangered species. Now, it's very well known that CITES used to deal with marine mammals and sea turtles, but more and more recently, they are starting to deal with commercially exploited species, that is to say, the fisherman species. And typically, their agenda is very busy for ray and sharks. Sharks, because just the story I just told you before, they do not rely on fishermen and fishermen's organization. So they said, we will take care of that by regulating trade. So already in Appendix 2 of CITES, Appendix 2, for your information, is not necessarily trade prohibition. Trade prohibition is under Appendix 1. But Appendix 2 requires export permits, more documentation, and the proof that export will not endanger the survival of the species. You have to approve that. So the burden on you, that will lead to more trade restriction. That is what CITES supporters are looking for. Now, we are having a conference of party very soon in South Africa, and already those species are going to be proposed. If you see this CITES issue only from the fisherman's point of view, that is a very dangerous weapon, because every proposal will have to be voted unless it is withdrawn. It's very easy for most of the delegation who are not interested in fishery. It's much easier for them to say yes instead of no. So it's very common that any proposal will go forward, 2/3 majority. And once it is listed on CITES, it requires another 2/3 majority, either to delist or underlist. So for fishermen, is very much worried about CITES because of those reasons. So they created FAO Expert Advisory Panel for CITES 10 years ago. The reason is because let's listen more of FAO voice and expert for those proposals which are associated with commercial fishery. Of course, their advice is not binding CITES voting at all, but CITES party would listen to more advice from the biologists, expert biologists. That is the reason. It's been very, very useful. And already they advise the future proposal already. I think some of them they support, some of them they do not. Okay, another issue you have to remember is ongoing negotiation at the United Nations for Biodiversity Convention. Biodiversity binding agreement was agreed to be negotiated. Again, it is a concern for traditional fisheries interest stakeholder, because what would happen with a new regime of biodiversity with the existing international legal framework such as UNCLOS or RFMO measure. Does this new instrument affect the current legal system? It should not, but we don't know yet. Spatial management, mainly represented by marine protected area, is probably going to be more and more popular management measure. You can put marine protected area into the fishery management category, but I deliberately put this category into the environmental issue, because marine protected area concept came from not fishery field, but biodiversity convention field. Many cases, as far as fishery is concerned, marine protected area is the same as closed fishing area, but they do not use fishery closed area. They use the word marine protected area because they'd like to expand more activity. Bottom trawling is another bad guy for fishery, because sometimes they just drag the bottom sea with full of many untapped resources. So we have to, there are two, I just mentioned two initiative and international guideline. Okay, bycatch discard marine debris. I will skip that because it's been dealt by Dr. Shim. Okay, I'd like to speak a bit about animal welfare. One example of animal welfare consideration affect fishery is the prohibition of shark finning. Shark finning, by definition, is not necessarily removal of the shark. Shark finning is an activity that fishermen take the fin and remove the fin from the body on board the vessel and discard the rest of the body. They do it because of the main economic reason. One, shark fin is expensive. The other, they do not want to use hold space for cheap shark fin meat. They would like to use it for more expensive tuna. But that gave rise to a lot of debates. One, it sounds unethical, and it's a waste of resources. So both many governments as well as RFMO prohibit shark finning. That means you have to bring shark with fin attached to the body. Marine mammal, sea turtle, I skip, you know it. IUU fishery. Someone said just a moment ago, the FAO new agreement on port state measure came into effect recently. And that attracted a lot of international attention because many people think port state measure enforcement would be a very effective fight against IUU, simply because most of the IUU fishery would like to make a port call and land its port. If port state agreement is enforced, they can refuse entry into port for those bad vessels. That's really work is a very effective deterrent. I just listed 36 countries because of the international attention. This is another instrument which is underway, FAO Global Record of Fishing Record. The reason why it is so significant is the bad fishermen, of course, change their name. So if you change the name of the vessel or owner, change of the owner of the vessel, they just change the identification. We call flag hopping. But if you are forced to use some unchanged number, for example, International Maritime Organization identification, then whenever you change ownership or whenever you change the name of the vessel, they can trace that vessel. So that is why it is very important. It's now under trial stage for bigger vessel for gross ton, 100 gross ton and over. Catch documentation scheme is a new scheme also leading to a fight against IUU fishery because it is very effective tool for traceability of fishing vessels. Unfortunately, this year's COFI could not agree on that voluntary guideline simply because of only two issues. Who should certify the document, whether coastal states or flag states, and if this guideline conflict with the current guideline, current practice, catch documentation scheme, because some RFMO already adopted that. What would happen? Those things remains unsolved. But so maybe a couple of years soon, within 1 year, we will finalize this. Social. Small-scale fishery is getting more and more attention. Safety at sea, we have to cooperate with the International Labour Organization and IMO. Labor, forced labor, and human trafficking, somebody mentioned that. Those things are getting more and more relevant for requirement for responsible fishery. Eco-level, we have so many eco-level now, too many, so consumers and processors are confused. MSC is a little bit expensive, but what happened to others? So they developed some evaluation framework called GSSI. That is kind of a benchmark by which they can judge compliance with the international standard. Fishery subsidy still going on under WTO negotiation. Aquaculture development, I just listed a couple of menus that they have to deal with those things, and I don't have time to dwell on that. Probably you can agree those 6 areas future consideration. Outlook. This is outlook for 2015. Now, the dotted line is the capture fisheries projection. And the orange line is capture fishery production for human consumption. The gap means the capture fishery not going to human consumption. That's a fish meal or fish oil. That is, gap is less and less. That means if capture, even though total capture fishery does not increase dramatically, consumption purpose for capture fishery continue to increase, whereas aquaculture will continue to increase. That point is fishery management, the future fishery cannot live alone. They have to align some general future agenda of the international community. That is the new Sustainable Development Goal 230. And food security and nutrition is more and more for the call for sustainable fisheries, and particularly SDG 14 for ocean and SDG 15 biodiversity. Now, Dr. Thompson said blue economy, and FAO is now initiating what they call blue growth initiative, and very similar to blue economy concept, and based upon the principle of the code of conduct, and directly contribute to SDG goal. And all in all, that is going to just aim in balancing the sustainable goal, that is environmental, social, and economic aspects. We have to balance those three aspects into the future sustainable fishery in the world. Sorry, I use a little bit more time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nomura-san, for the very comprehensive program within very limited time. Okay, so is there any comments? Okay, I think maybe you are hungry for lunch. So the following, so here we would like to thank you for 4 foreign speakers for their wonderful presentation. Again, please.